All right. All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the morning short talk sessions for our first day. We have four lovely talks lined up by different speakers and from different parts of India, from Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, the Nilgiris in the south, and from Deepor Beel in Assam. I'm looking forward to these. Our first talk today is by Tony Gaston. Tony is joining us today all the way from Canada. It's past midnight for him, so thank you so much, Tony, for staying up past midnight. He's going to be talking to us about birds of the Delhi Ridge. He surveyed these ridges in 1971 to 74, and then again in 2018 to 22. And we'll hear about how he has seen the birds of this ridge change over these many years in his short talk. The short talk will be played. It's a pre-recorded talk, but Tony will join us after the talk for a live Q&A for 5 minutes. Can we have Tony's talk now, please?
Greetings from Ottawa, Canada. My name is Tony Gaston, and I have a long history of bird watching in India. I lived in Himachal Pradesh in '69, in Delhi from 1970 to 74, in Kerala for several months in '78, and again in Himachal from 1978 to 1980. Since 1980, although I've worked mainly in Canada for the Canadian Wildlife Service, I've returned to India for a few weeks in most years, travelling extensively in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh and Odisha, and I always check out the birds wherever I travel. Incidentally, that picture of the hairy-looking guy in the middle here is me in 1969. During 1971 to 1974, I carried out research around Delhi for a PhD at the University of Oxford, studying the ecology and behaviour of babblers in order to determine the evolutionary causes of their unusual group territorial and cooperative breeding behaviour. Most of my fieldwork was conducted on the central ridge behind what was then Willingdon Crescent, now Mother Teresa Crescent. I spent an awful lot of time in the field, as you do when you're young and energetic, often arriving at the field site before dawn and continuing observations through until the summer heat forced me home around midday. During these visits, in addition to observing babblers, I recorded daily all the other species that I saw. I also misnetted my study species and in the process trapped many non-target species, especially those living in shrubby vegetation. This enabled me to identify some species, especially Philoscopus, that I might otherwise have missed. And it's worth remembering that there were no field guides back then, so identification was a little more tricky then than it is now. A few years ago, I decided to attempt a comparison between my observations in the 1970s and more recent observations by the many birdwatchers now active in and around Delhi. In this way, I hope to identify changes in status. To make the comparison, I defined two areas, a northern zone immediately surrounding and including my former study area, and a larger zone to the south of my study area. I did this because, from recent visits, I am aware that the vegetation of the central ridge has changed since the 1970s, with most open spaces, previously rocky or scrubby barrens, having developed tree cover. By contrast, some open rocky areas remain in the southern zone and hence provide a closer habitat match to my earlier study site. The upper picture here illustrates a section of Prosopis juliflora forest with a partially open canopy and with an understory of the browse-resistant shrubs Adatoda and Ziziphus. This was typical of better wooded parts of my study area in the 1970s. About a third of the area would have looked like this. The lower picture is much more typical of today's forest, with a mainly closed canopy and a denser and more diverse understory. Because of the way I aggregated my records in the 1970s, I can't reconstruct my daily bird lists, so I can't enter them on eBird. However, I did aggregate the records by week in a paper that was published in the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society in 1978, and I've used the lists that formed the basis of that paper for comparison with, firstly, the proportion of eBird lists on which a species has been reported during 2018 to 2022, and secondly, the proportion of weeks in which a species was recorded on the same sample of lists. The latter comparison has the advantage that the duplication of lists by different observers doesn't affect the result. I'm not presenting you here with any of the numerical results, just the trends. I have to point out that, as my comparisons are based on different methods of data collection, they don't tell us whether a species has actually increased or decreased since the 1970s, but rather whether it's more or less likely to have done so relative to other species. In other words, these are not absolute measurements of increase, they are relative measurements of increase. Hence, species matching my criterion for probable increase are much more likely to have increased than species that match my criterion for probable decrease. 14 species were classified as probable increase. Of these, I think we can be confident that species which I never saw in the 1970s, which have been seen regularly in the 21st century, have actually colonized the area in the interim. Those are the species highlighted in purple: yellow-wattled lapwing, booted eagle, cinereous tit, and scaly-breasted muna. All of these species were present around Delhi at that time. I could have found them if I'd travelled out of town, but I never saw them in my study area. Booted eagle, showing probable increase in both north and south zones, is the most striking example. Species highlighted in light green are found mainly in woodland, while the ones highlighted in pale brown are characteristic of open areas. "15 species I classified as probable decrease, of which 4 have never been recorded at all in either zone during 2018 to 2022. Those are Indian nightjar, white rump vulture, tawny eagle, and great grey shrike. Again, species highlighted in pale green are found mainly in woods. Those highlighted in pale brown occur mainly in open areas or scrub. Significantly more of the species characteristic of scrub fall in the probable decrease category than species characteristic of woodland. In the 24 paper in Indian Birds, I made some comparison with trends identified in the State of India's Birds report. I've used here the long-term trends identified in the State of India's Birds and compared them to my own results as listed in the previous 2 slides. This comparison is a little bit different, and I think a little bit better than the one I made in the 2024 paper. The results show that of the species I list as probable increase, 3 are thought to have increased nationally, 3 have remained stable, and 2 are thought to have decreased. For species I list as probable decrease, the corresponding numbers are 0, 2, and 8. So the comparison suggests that my results, at least for some species, broadly reflect national trends rather than some purely local effect. As I mentioned earlier, the core of my 1970s study area is now much more densely wooded than it was. In fact, looking at a picture provided by Basil Edwards in a paper for JBNHS in 1926, the area seems to have been completely devoid of tree cover in the 1920s. However, there is evidence that the Prosopis juliflora, that formed most of the woodland canopy in the 1970s, was actually planted along trails, perhaps to provide shade, although only traces of these avenues could be discerned in 1971. It's likely that some of the changes I identified over the past 40 years have come about in response to these changes in vegetation. That might apply especially to species like great grey shrike, black-winged kite and white-eyed buzzard, all of which prefer open areas for feeding. In fact, if we compare the apparent trends since the 1970s among birds of woodland, scrub and open ground, there is a clear tendency for woodland species to have increased, while scrub species have decreased. As I said earlier, on the basis of my comparisons, we cannot say that species have absolutely increased or decreased, but what we can say is that in relative terms, woodland species are more likely to have increased and scrub species more likely to have decreased since the 1970s. These two papers that I've listed here summarise what I've managed to salvage from my records of the 1970s. For further details of the methods or the results for species that I haven't mentioned today, please check them out. I'm delighted to have had this opportunity to address the symposium, and I'm also delighted to see how much birdwatching and ornithology in India has blossomed since the days back in the late 1960s when the active members of the Delhi Bird Club could pretty much fit inside one taxi. Thank you very much for listening.
Right. Thank you. Thanks so much, Tony, for that talk. That was really, really interesting. While our questions are still coming in on Discord, let's get started on some discussion. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you thought were the most surprising changes that you saw over this period of 35 years that spanned this study?
Sorry, you'd like me to amplify on that?
Yes,
Uh,
yes. What was the most
well,
surprising? What did you
if we
think?
leave out the very obvious one, which is the disappearance of the gyps vultures, um, I think the most striking element of change has been the increase in the amount of woodland trees and canopy, both in my study area and in other parts of Delhi as well. There's been a huge amount of planting in Delhi in the urban and suburban areas. And, some of the parks are pretty open, but as far as tall trees, there's still lots of trees. And if you go back to some of the earlier accounts, a place like Lodi Gardens, which was a popular birding spot back in the 50s and 60s, had a lot of understory. Well, that's all gone, but there's still lots of trees. So you'll get things like hornbills, which we didn't necessarily see in the past, but all the babblers have disappeared because there's no cover for them. So I think that's the main change has been a change in vegetation, which has led to striking changes in the avifauna.
Yeah. Yeah, this is such a feature of so many Indian cities, and I'm guessing also a trend worldwide that the vegetation changes so much. People like to plant trees, but the understory is pretty much non-existent. Um, yeah. All right. So we have a question from Praveen. He asks whether you're aware of similar studies elsewhere in the Western Hemisphere that use broadly similar methods, structured, um, surveys earlier and semi-structured eBird data later, and what are the results or challenges that they have faced?
Well, I think it's important to realize that when I was doing my study in the 70s, I wasn't expecting to use it for monitoring. So what I did was very much cobbled together with whatever I could find. There are a lot of long-term monitoring studies going on in Europe and North America, uh, which where people have put in a huge amount of thought over sampling and survey techniques and so on, and there's a huge literature that you can refer to on that. As far as specifically urban and suburban birds, they tend to be a bit neglected in the West. I'm not sure why that is, but probably because it's very much easier in a country like Canada to get out into the wilderness and look at birds in the wild. So people don't tend to hang around downtown bird watching, whereas Delhi is such a vast city, and there is in fact lots of nice bird habitat there. So, there's lots of people bird watching in downtown Delhi, which is not true in downtown Ottawa, where I live.
Right. Aditi asks Tony, she says, great talk. Did you also collect blood samples along with morphometric measurements for the birds that you misnetted? And were you able to use that for some research?
No, I didn't take blood samples. I mean, you've got to remember this was before anybody was taking blood samples for DNA or something like that, or
Yeah,
sexing. Um, but you've got to remember that at the same time, the Bombay Natural History Society was carrying out a very big program including blood sampling. So, I mean, we do have lots of, or there is somewhere, a lot of blood taken from birds at that period in a lot of camps like
right,
Barrampur and Point Calumet and so on. So it's not that those data are not available. It's just that I wasn't taking it. In fact, looking back, the whole thing was very sort of unsupervised. I had a supervisor at University of Delhi. I was in contact with Dr. Salim Ali at Bombay Natural History Society, and they provided me with the bands. But that
I
was,
see.
uh, nobody ever told me how to use them. It just happened that I had a British Trust for Ornithology license, so I knew how to use them. But things
Right.
were a lot looser back then.
I can imagine. Yeah. A comment from Suhail. He says the photo from 1926 is so striking. Do we have an idea of what, quote unquote, the natural vegetation of the ridge would have been like back then?
I know, I'm sure we don't. And I don't think we have any idea what the natural vegetation of India was like. I mean, really, when you think about it,
Yeah,
um, the whole country has been totally transformed by thousands of years of agriculture and forest exploitation of one sort and another. So, but the the state of the ridge, if it hadn't been messed around by the building of New Delhi, would probably have been similar to the kind of Aravalli vegetation
mm,
that you get dominated by trees like Anagessis,
right,
acacia, um, and butea,
right,
those kind of elements. The sort
hmm,
of it's essentially a peri-desert area
right,
which
right,
blends pretty rapidly as you go westwards into the
hmm,
Thar Desert type habitat.
right, right. All right. Yeah, thanks so much, Tony. We have to now move to the next talk. But thank you so much for that talk. This was great. And I hope that you can also join us on Discord and interact tomorrow whenever you're awake. I know it's really, really late in
Yes,
the
I'm
night.
off to
Thanks.
bed, but it was great
Yeah.
to be able to take part, and I think it's wonderful that you're doing this. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here. All right. Our next talk today in this series is by Anamika. Anamika is going to be talking to us about bird densities along a rural-urban gradient in Mirzapur and Bhadohi district in Uttar Pradesh. Let's have Anamika's talk now, followed by 5 minutes of questions for her.
Good morning everyone, and thank you for joining my presentation. My name is Anamika. I'm a third year PhD student working on bird community in rural urban landscape. Today I'll be sharing a piece of work from my PhD project titled as Density of Sympatric Synanthropic Bird Species along Urban Rural Gradient in Mirzapur and Bhadohi district, Uttar Pradesh. This work was done under guidance of Dr. Ashutosh Singh and is supported by University Grant Commission. I would like to introduce this study as the birds are widely recognized as ecological indicator as they respond sensitively to any environmental change. In recent years, the rural-urban gradient has become an increasingly dynamic landscape due to rapid urbanization. Seasonal bird survey to such landscape gradient can provide valuable insight into habitat use and species adaptation. Since urbanization significantly alters habitat structure, analyzing bird density can help us in sustainable development and urban planning. And this brings me to ask question if urbanization has influence on density of sympatric synanthropic bird species and whether season has influence on density of sympatric synanthropic bird species and to investigate the role of density in understanding coexistence and competition. My study was conducted in and around Mirzapur and Bhadohi district, Uttar Pradesh. These locations represent a clear urban-rural gradient ranging from a densely built-up town to agricultural and natural areas. These landscapes include a mix of residential zone, farmland, scrub jungle, deciduous forest, and water bodies, making it an ideal for studying synanthropic bird communities. To design my sampling framework, I first downloaded global settlement data from European Union's dataset, which maps settlement layer worldwide. For my study area, I then reclassified the original 7 settlement type into 3 simplified categories: rural, semi-urban, and urban, better aligned with ecological variation. I overlaid a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid across this landscape and established a proportional number of point count stations in each gradient type. These locations were then used for conducting standardized board survey during the fieldwork. Since my board survey followed a distance sampling framework, it's important to acknowledge the assumptions behind it. First is all birds located at zero distance must be detected with certainty. Second, the bird should be detected before they move in response to observer. Third, distance to each bird must be measured accurately. And finally, detections must be independent. To explain patterns in bird density and detection across the gradient, I recorded detailed habitat covariate during each field survey. A total of 22 covariate were recorded, which I grouped into 5 major categories: vegetation structure, proximity to land cover, anthropogenic disturbance, and habitat type, and weather factors. These covariates were carefully chosen that may have some ecological relation and behavioral underpinning with synanthropic birds. For this study, I selected 5 pair of sympatric bird species that are commonly found in human-dominated landscape. These species were chosen from different feeding guild, including granivore, insectivore, omnivore, frugivore, to capture a range of ecological strategy by focusing on functionally distinct yet coexisting species to understand how pairing diet and foraging behavior influence density pattern along the rural-urban gradient. For this objective, I followed a structure analysis workflow. I began with data normalization, followed by Pearson's correlation test to check multicollinearity among covariate. Next, I used NMDS to explore community level pattern. This was followed by open population modeling to estimate seasonal density, and then finally performed Kruskal-Wallis test to assess density variation across landscape gradient. Through the Pearson's correlation test, what I found was that several variables were strongly correlated with each other. So using a cutoff of 0.5, I retained the variable with low to moderate correlation to ensure my models remain robust and interpretable. As I analyzed the community level pattern using NMDS, a clear overlapping gradient was found. The rural and urban sites overlapped by about 1/4, while the semi-urban sites occupied an intermediate position bridging the two ends of gradient. Interestingly, some habitat variables showed distinct associations. Vegetation was linked with rural sites, whereas buildup was significantly aligned with urban area. This pattern reflects how bird community respond to a shifting landscape structure along the rural-urban continuum. This slide presents the density pattern of two sympatric parakeet species across the urban-rural gradient and different season. We found that the density of both species to be higher in urban gradient, whereas their density in all the gradient were higher in winter season. This slide shows the density pattern of two sympatric bulbul species across the urban-rural gradient and season. We found that the density of red-vented bulbul to be higher in rural gradient and density of red-whiskered bulbul to be higher in urban areas, and the density of both the species in all the gradient were higher in winter season. Now this slide presents the density pattern of two sympatric robin species along the urban-rural gradient. We found that the density of Indian robin to be higher in rural areas, whereas density of Oriental magpie robin to be higher in urban areas. And the density of Indian robin in all the gradient were higher in summer season. In contrast, the density of Oriental magpie robin in all the gradient were higher in winter season. Another sympatric pair of species, one from omnivore guild and another from insectivore guild, we found that density of jungle babbler, which is from omnivore guild, was higher in urban gradient. In contrast, the large grey babbler, which is from insectivore guild, was higher in rural region. Interestingly, the density of jungle babbler in all the gradient were higher in winter season, and density of large grey babbler in all the gradient were higher in summer season. This slide highlights the density pattern of two sympatric dove species across the rural-urban gradient. The box plot shows that the density of spotted dove in all the gradient were higher in winter season, whereas the density of Eurasian collared dove were higher in summer season. The Eurasian collared dove density was higher in urban areas, whereas the spotted dove density were higher in rural areas. I conclude that the density of species from frugivore and omnivore were higher in winter season, probably due to seasonal resource abundance and therefore facilitating the coexistence of sympatric species. Granivore and insectivore with species-specific seasonal peak in density indicate temporal niche differentiation. Higher density of frugivore in urban gradient, probably due to a greater number of fruiting tree, which may reduce the competition of resources. The sympatric pair of species from rest other guild with opposite density pattern may have special niche differentiation. One limitation of this study is that niche analysis wasn't performed, so the density pattern only suggests possible coexistence and competition mechanism. Thank you for your time and attention. To take any question or discuss any part of the study further. Thank you once again.
Thanks for the talk, Anamika. Can we have you on video, please, if possible? Yes. Hi. People are still typing in their questions, but in the meantime, can you say a little bit about these species pairs that you chose, Anamika? It's interesting. You had the large gray babbler and the jungle babbler comparison, and similarly for bulbul species and dove species and so on. Did you um, find, especially for the babblers, did you find them in the same areas around the same time of the year? It's quite interesting because I haven't seen them too many times in similar areas.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the question. Um, the jungle babbler and the large grey babbler, since the survey was done in Mirzapur and Bhadohi district, so the northern part, the Bhadohi region is quite urbanized, like high number of building and built-up structure, those kind of landscape. And the southern Mirzapur is rural area. So the large grey babbler, jungle babbler and large grey babbler were found together at some location, but not many. And in many locations, those two species were found like separately. Like when the jungle babbler was there, the large grey babbler was absent. And when in south, rural region, when large grey babbler was present there, jungle babbler was absent in most of the cases. But at some places, they were found together.
Got it. We have a couple of more questions and they're coming up. So you can continue to follow them on Discord, but we'll take one more question live before we go to the next talk. Um, Aditi is asking, how do you account for observer bias in your model? And the fact that each observation is independent to the other, how do you account for that? Because you could be seeing the same bird twice. Are you assuming that each species is homogeneously distributed, since you're comparing densities from your surveyed areas and not actually the entire urban or rural area?
Mm. So, the observer bias in the sense that, first of all, in all the survey, there was only one observer, me.
Right.
And uh, so if I'm observing some bird at a certain distance, so I'll remember that where the bird I found. If the bird flew to some other place, I'm watching. This was 10-minute survey. So, and if, for example, a bird is calling from a 50-meter distance, for example, a babbler or some other species, so the that point is recorded, and if some other individual of the same species is present some at different location, 10-meter or 20-meter, that is a different observation. So that was distance based survey. So distance was recorded.
Right. Yeah, this is also probably a slightly longer discussion. You can take it on Discord as well, perhaps answer some questions there.
Yes.
You'll be able to do a little bit of back and forth with the audience there as well. But thanks, Anamika. This was a really interesting talk and very nice comparisons. I enjoyed the study design that you had. Um, all right, for now, we'll have to move on to our next speaker.
Thank
Our
you.
next speaker for today is, thanks, Anamika, is David. David citizen science to assess impacts of urbanization on bird assemblages in the Nilgiris in South India. We'll play David's talk, followed by.
Hi everyone. Today I'll be presenting my work titled Leveraging Citizen Science to Assess Impacts of Urbanization on Bird Assemblages of Nilgiris. It is well known urbanization is one of the most extreme forms of habitat modification, leading to structural homogenization, which in turn creates a set of new ecological filters that filter the species based on their traits. Often, the local species which are native to the landscape are filtered out, and a few select species are proven advantageous. These species, which can adapt to the modified conditions and grow in number, are called winners, and the local native species, which loses due to these filters, are called losers, thus leading to a homogenized biotic community. Citizen science as a tool for scientific data collection has been long in use in the global north, whereas it has seen steep increase in use in our country over the last decade. SOIB, numerous bird atlases have shown up in the last few years, which are good examples for using citizen science as their primary source of data. Although it is important to keep in mind that this data is prone to biases such as clustering, non-uniform effort, and the observer quality is questionable. On the other hand, it provides us with immense amount of logistic advantage, such as low time and labor intensive field sessions, and can be successfully implemented in urban centers due to the higher birding interest and volunteer support. As said earlier, unsystematic citizen science data has three major biases, whereas a systematic citizen science dataset, such as bird atlas datasets, by implementing a strong field design, they eliminate clustering of data and effort, but the observer quality is still in question, which is not a problem in the research grade dataset due to trained observers collecting the data. So to test if observer quality does have a major effect or not, we had two objectives in our mind. The first is to use systematic citizen science surveys to understand the effects of urbanization on bird community parameters in the Nilgiris. The second, to compare the accuracy of systematically collected citizen science dataset against a research grade dataset. Our study area was in the Nilgiris, comprising of three towns, Uti, Kunur, and Kotagiri. Roughly put together, the study area was around 100 square kilometers. The extent of each urban limit was mapped using a combination of night light data and an LULC map from Ramesh et al. 2022. We adopted a bird atlas framework where we divided the whole study area into 1 into 1 square kilometer grids. Further, each of these 1 into 1 square kilometer grids was divided into 4 quadrants. And from each 1 into 1 square kilometer grid, we selected one 500 into 500 meter grid cell. Within these 500 to 500 meter grid, we laid a 300 meter trail, and it was made sure that this trail cuts across the majority of the land types present within the grid. The transect was also time bound to 15 minutes. The grid cells were classified based on the urban cover present within them. So class 1 was classified with urban cover greater than 30%, class 2 with 30 to 15%, class 3 15 to 5%, and class 4 with less than 5%. In total, we had 97 grids, and we decided all of these categories before we began our field survey. For citizen science surveys, we comprised 2 to 3 members. A lead member would be an expert birder, and an amateur or a beginner birder would accompany them. All 97 grids were surveyed by these teams, and where each of the grid were replicated three times temporally. On the other hand, the research grade surveys, 25 grids were randomly selected out of the 97 grids, where along the same trail, me and my field assistant collected data, and each of these grids were again replicated 3 times temporally. We primarily used the land use land cover map from Ramesh et al. 2022 to get the percentage of various land use types within these 500 to 500 meter grid cells. In addition to that, we also calculated the distance to Shola patch from each of these grids and the distance to city center from each of these grids. Estimate of canopy and understory cover were also collected from each grid. Moving on to the results, we can see a very clear trend where species richness increases with decrease in urbanization, whereas abundance increases with increase in urbanization. The rank abundance curve suggests that the community in highly urbanized areas are more uneven compared to communities in less urbanized areas. To visualize the bird community composition, we used NMDS, and it clearly suggests that the community among the four urban clusters are quite starkly varying from each other. To find the significant drivers of species richness and abundance, we used generalized linear models, where we used all the covariates to create a global model. Further dredging of the global model, we obtained the best fit model with the least amount of AIC, and that explained the most amount of the data. So for richness, as you can see highlighted in red, distance to shoal forest and percentage of settlement within the grid were significantly driving the seen trend in richness. And for abundance, percentage of settlement, distance to city center, and percentage of shoal forest within the grid were significant drivers. Forest specialist species had a higher occupancy probability at low urbanization areas compared to high urbanization areas. Urban generalists show the opposite trend, where the occupancy probability increased with increase in urbanization. And open area generalists had a mixed reaction, and most of them didn't show such stark trends compared to the other two groups. The encounter rates for the most abundant and frequently cited species were calculated. In this, we did not see any significant differences between the researcher grade dataset and the citizen science dataset. Only Indian white-eye had a significant difference in the encounter rates between these two datasets. So it seems like the nature, the size, or the color of the bird doesn't really affect the encounter rates. To further see if there are any differences in the community captured by these two datasets, we used two community dissimilarity matrices, Bray Curtis and Jacquard's, and again we didn't find any significant differences between these two datasets. Key results: urbanization reduced species richness and increased abundance of select species. Percentage of settlements, presence and distance to shoal patches were primarily the important drivers in species richness and abundance. Forest specialist species were replaced by commensals that were well adapted to the modified urban habitat. Generalists were not greatly affected by the urbanization gradient. Systematic citizen science surveys proved to be quite accurate compared to the research grade data. I want to acknowledge and thank the following people. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, David. Thanks for that really nice talk. It's an interesting comparison of citizen science data and research grade data that you collected yourself. And I was curious to see the difference. You didn't see difference in the detection of several species, but white eyes in particular. Do you have
Right.
any theories about why that may be?
I mean, I have some guesses uh, per se, but just because of their behavior, I would say because of the dense undergrowth in the sholas that you see in the Nilgiris, much more camouflaged species, all the general guesses, but we are not really sure why only that species we have such a stark difference in encounter rates compared to other species. But seems like overall, birders are extremely good in detecting birds in general.
I'm also curious about that. Was it the same set of birders who did all the citizen science surveys, or was it different two or three group of two or three people every time?
It was a group of 15 people But then there was additional five who volunteered here and there. But then these were mostly from Government Arts College in Ooty. Students from there were primarily the volunteers who collected these citizen science data sets.
Got it. Right. We have a couple of talks on questions on Discord as well. Soumya says that was an excellent talk. Do you think that the increase in abundance in urbanized habitats are contributed is mainly the result of a few synanthropic species?
Yeah, absolutely. Mostly dominated by house sparrow, crows, miners, and rock pigeons. Just these few synobics, they just boost the abundance, overall abundance to quite a high number.
Right. Praveen says, do you think that the lack of difference could have between the research grade and citizen science data could have been an artifact of how low the sample size was for such a comparison, or could it have been in some way related to how the citizen science team leaders were selected? Could a randomized assignment perhaps change the result?
Yeah, could have been, but then those citizen science volunteers were not per se eliminated or filtered by any basis. Whoever volunteered, where I used them to collect data. So, but then the sample size is a issue. This is quite a small sample size. Maybe if we can replicate it over the years, then it would, give us a better average, better look at things.
Right. Badrinarayanan is asking, was there a distinction between visual bird detection versus auditory detection as far as the citizen scientists were concerned?
Tracking every individual detection is either a visual or a audio detection is tough because in order to do that, then every single bird or every single observation needs to have a comment in below to for me to know if it's an audio or a visual detection. So for now, we don't have the distinction in the data. We've just treated it as all visual detections, but most of them were visual detections. Because audio, I requested the volunteers not to, go in depth about audio because their audio detections are not very strong.
Got it. But what about you? You probably had a lot of auditory detections as a researcher, right? In your data?
No, I also
No?
limited
Okay,
myself, yeah, to mostly visual detections to keep them constant.
I see. Got it. All right. We're running a little bit behind time, David, so I'd request you to take some questions on Discord. There's a lot of interest in the talk. Please do take a look at the thread where people are
Absolutely.
posting questions and continue to engage.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your talk. All right. Our last and final talk for the morning session today is by Taniya. And Taniya is coming to us from Deepor, Beel, the Ramsar site and wildlife sanctuary. And she's going to be talking about bird diversity dynamics based on a long-term systematic monitoring study. Over to Taniya now for her talk.
Hi, I'm Tanya from Seven Leaves Research. I have been working on the Beel Ramsar site for the past 4 years. 3 years back, that is in 2022, we started conducting an event called Winter Birding Festival at Beel, and our insights and study happened from the event itself. Beel is a wetland situated west of Guwahati city. This is whole of Guwahati. It's a part of beautiful landscape towards its south that it joins the Garbhanga Reserve Forest and the Rani Reserve Forest, being important foraging ground for the animals in the forest and wetland. But now only for elephants. That also is becoming rare due to deaths of individuals on the railway tracks. Here's the railway track if you can see. Deepor provides various other ecosystem services, such as recharges the flood water of the city, which has become crucial day by day, as we are reading in the news. And as mentioned, it supports various life forms, including humans, as fishermen community have been living here for decades. How this makes Deepor Beel a perfect example of why wetlands are important and how multifunctional they are. So in 2022, it was designated as Ramsar site in 2014, the red boundary. And in 2014, 4.1 square kilometer of the area was established to be wildlife sanctuary, the yellow boundary. We still don't have proper demarcation of wetland or whole of Ramsar site, and the one provided in the internet to be around 40 square kilometer doesn't seem to be true, as the Ramsar site boundary, which we got from RTI, is approximately 16 square kilometers. Our study area has been marked as per summer flood points of 2022 with the area of 15.4 square kilometers. Deepor Beel is the hotshot study area of the region, being one of the 3 Ramsar sites in the entire Northeast India and being close to urban setting. Loads of researchers have done or are doing studies on the wetland. While these localized studies have yielded a lot of insights, the holistic understanding of the Deepor Beel is still fragmented. Observing this, 7 Weeks Research has taken the initiative to conduct a systematic annual surveys of birds in 2022 to have continuous comparable records of birds to understand the health of the lake and understanding birds as indicator species. And as mentioned before, it's partially a protected area, most of it falling under the Ramsar site, and is a lifeline to fishing community. We also wanted to understand the impact of their activities on the birds and the various other threats. Deepor Beel is a big wetland, and due to its biological and ecological importance, regular surveys and bird counts are being conducted by forest departments and other institutes like AWC. But it has always been from the one side of the lake, that is the wildlife sanctuary area, the watchtower side. But that doesn't cover the whole of wetland. It just doesn't justify. So we come up with a design to study whole of Deepor Beel through mix of citizen science and systematic surveys and further analysis done by experts. In context to our second objective, that was to understand the relation of fishermen and the birds, we are conducting birding from end of December to mid of January. It serves as one of the peak winter migration time in the region, and Beel Mara, a traditional fishing festival celebrated on first or second Sunday of January, which is just before Bihu. So basically on Beel Mara, fishermen start harvesting the big fishes in the wetland. Hundreds of boats of local fishermen are there in Deepor Beel, and thousands of people come to buy fishes. So to understand this impact, we have spread across our birding dates to be 10 days and 5 days before the fishing festival, during fishing festival, 5 days and 10 days after the fishing festival. So the collection of data is quite strict. 7 teams, each led by skilled ornithologists, serves as team leaders. They encircle the lake at designated locations in these 7 locations that are provided here. These team leaders assure the precision of data collection and also provide guidance to the participants as the event is open for everyone. The designated birds watching are from 7 to 10 a.m., where data collectors collect through 3 one-hour eBird checklists created from 7 to 8, 8 to 9, and 9 to 10 a.m. Here is like one of the examples given here. And the team leaders maintain hourly checklists in the eBird and share it with the common account, which we have here, 7 Weaves Research Foundation. These are the results. I won't go much in details, but we will only understand what we have learned in the past 3 years. So collectively in 3 years, we counted more than 200 birds, with highest count recorded on 2022-2023 session with approximately 28,000 individuals. I'll come back to this graph again as it has a lot to tell. Going deeper, we understood the trends that how the birds are actually present or fluctuating in the particular region of the wetland through its count and species diversity. How in these 2 graphs you can see the count of the birds have decreased significantly from year 1 to year 2 and 3, but the diversity in all the locations have been quite consistent throughout the years. Then these large data are skewed to understand what locations have been consistent, which areas are under need of urgent conservation. For example, here it shows that Dharapur has been richest in 22-23 and Chakardo had the highest bird count. Why we have used this except ducks and swallows, I'll tell you. Ducks make up the highest percentage in total count of our total individuals, and swallows too. And they may not highlight the importance of other birds such as waders and so on. So we have excluded ducks, and for swallows, for example, the same in our first graph here, you can see in the first year, you see that the peak count was 28,000, and by day 5, it goes up to 18,000. So it's because the count of martins and swallows went from around 7 to 8,000 to 500 by day 5. So just one group of species, the decline of one group of species has shown that that by day 5 the number of birds have gone down. The second learning that we had is one of the important ones. It tells that Deepor Beel has different habitats. It's not only water. It experiences seasonal hydrological fluctuations influenced by monsoonal rainfall, inflow from the Brahmaputra River, stormwater discharge from the city, and during summers, these factors contribute to a rise in water level, expanding the wetland surface. In contrast, the dry season leads to gradual retreat of water from the semi-outer edges, exposing the terrestrial and semi-aquatic habitats. And this natural drying process is crucial for habitat formation, supporting a diverse avian community. The emergent wintering ground include like shallow water, marshes and swamps, grassland, open grass fields, and all of them are important foraging and resting sites for migratory as well as residential species. And the importance of these habitats can be understood through 63 migratory bird species that have been consistently recorded at Deepor Beel in last 3 years. Among these, 16 species strongly occupy open grass fields, 12 strongly occupy shallow water habitats, 10 they only prefer grasslands, and so on. So the reduction of these critical habitats, including feeding and nesting sites, can affect species composition and overall biodiversity. And then we understand through long-term systematic monitoring and habitat-specific details that the conservation of the whole of Deepor Beel is vital for its rich bird diversity and congregations. So the reduction of these critical habitats, including feeding, nesting, can affect species composition, unregulated alteration or shrinkage of the wetland, which can disrupt all the natural processes that has been going on that we discussed in the last slide. Such disturbances may result in a decline in the number of migratory birds visiting Deepor Beel and negatively impact resident avian population. Coming to our first graph, this indicates the trend of total count of individuals from day 1 to day 5. Reminding day 1, day 2 are 10 and 5 days before the fishing festival, day 3 is during the fishing festival, and day 4 and 5 are after 5 and 10 days of fishing festival. In 22-23, we have discussed that why we have noticed the sharp decline. In 23 and 24, you will see that the numbers have almost being stable from day 1 to day 5. So this vast difference that you might be observing between the first against the second and third is because in 2023, the water was artificially held till October for the Rising Sun Festival by the government. And the water coverage by the December and January were still high, leading to drop in numbers of individuals from 28,000 to 10,000 by year 2. This also helps understand that how sensitive the ecosystem in the wetland is, and studying in depth is necessary as careless modifications can have severe impacts. As there was no water holding in 2024, so the trends have been a little better, where the peak count of the birds have gone up till 18,000 this year. Here you can see that how the birds, it's just a rough representation of how the birds and the fishermen move, before, during, and after the fishing festival. So this is how usually the birds are. Most of the birds are in the Dharapurs, most of them are in Chakardeo and all these areas. And here there are very less number of birds. And then you will see during the Beel Mara, most of the birds, they come and congregate toward the watchtower, toward the Boragaon, and toward the Pamohi area. Some still, left in Dharapur because the disturbance is less. And after the Beel Mara, you will notice that the birds, they go back to their original positions. The number of birds are less in the wetland. So, the birds, they spread out. So there is this beautiful coexistence between the fishermen and the birds in the lake, which probably have been for years, because the tradition is practiced since decades, and the birds wouldn't have been returning if there was major disturbance caused to them. So this whole process observes a thoughtful management system practiced by the local fishermen community, and it's being studied and researched by my colleague. And if anyone has questions or anyone interested to have more detailed discussions, are free to contact us. In the end, I would like to thank all the people who have been part of the event, with each year making the data and understanding of the wetland better for its better management and conservation. And I would like to thank the Bird Monitoring Symposium for giving me the opportunity to present the study. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Tanya, for that talk. Really interesting. Are you with us, Tanya?
Yes, thank you.
Right. Tanya unfortunately can't be on video, she says, but we can take questions for her. Please post your questions on Discord. We're running a little bit behind time, Tanya, but maybe we'll take a question or two before we end. You said that you see in 2023 that there was a decline, but in 24 and 25, you do not see that stark decline by day 5. Can you
Yeah.
say a little bit more about that difference that you see between these years?
Are we talking about the overall decline in the count? Like,
Yes, over the
uh,
5 years.
over the
Sorry, over the 5 days.
3 years. Oh, okay, over the 5 years. So basically, what we saw was that on the first and second day, you get the baseline data of that particular year regarding the birds when they are there. So on the third day, when the fishing festival is actually happening, then you see that, from day 1 to day 5, the numbers are not really changing. There are like a bit of fluctuations during day 3, day 4, and at times you will see that on certain days, day 3 is the peak count of that year, and at times day 4 are like the peak count of that year. So yeah, so what basically that we wanted to explain was that yes, there is some kind of disturbance when the fishing festival happens, in the Deepor. But after a week or after the 10 days, you'll see that the birds, they spread out to their original place. Like they spread out, and then because the Beel Mara, the fishing festival, is only for a very limited period of time, hardly for 2 to 3 days. And but the birds, they don't fly away or go to some other wetland. They stay in the Deepor. They just go to different corners, and then they come back once the fishing festival is done.
Right. My question was about the difference that you see across years. So you said that in 2023 you did see this dip, but in 24 and 25 you did not. But I may have misunderstood. But was there a difference in across years in the trends that you saw?
Yes. So the first year we saw, there is like this huge declining trend where the birds, were from 28,000 to 18,000. Like there was a dip of 10,000. But when we actually, divided the birds in different groups as per to their families and everything, we understood that the major dip was because of the martins and swallows. But we are still confused why that happened on the first year, because there was not any such difference seen in second and third year for the martins and swallows. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Tanya. I think people are still typing in their questions on Discord. I can see that you've already joined the Discord server, so please do take more questions on Discord. Okay, we have one question that has just come in. Maybe let's take that. Tej says that this is a great talk to understand human interaction and wetland bird numbers. If possible, his suggestion is to please continue to expand the study to understand local impacts and how birds are moving to other wetlands in response to these festivals, and how they respond to other human disturbances and activities over the years as well. Do you plan to continue this monitoring, Tanya?
Yes, we are planning of continuing this monitoring for next few years, and yes, it is in our plan to expand it to other places, especially the nearby wetlands, the major wetlands, so we can actually compare the differences also during that time.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you everyone for joining in for the morning short talk session. We have a short break till 11:45. And starting 11:45, we have two parallel speed talk sessions, which are on Discord alone. Um, all the links to these speed talks will be posted or are already posted, and threads for respective speakers have been created by our organizers and volunteers. So please watch out for the 5th September speed talk channels on Discord. And please post your questions to all our speed talk speakers in the respective threads. To keep the discussion on Discord organized, make sure that you look out for the threads and post your questions specifically in that thread and tag the speaker. You should be able to find speaker handles. Use the @ symbol to tag specific people. And yeah, so we have the speed talk session from 11:45 to 1 p.m. today. And from 1 to 2, we will all break for lunch. And in the afternoon, we have one session for short talks, which will be moderated by my colleague Tarun. So we'll meet on YouTube again. The link will be posted in the appropriate channel. So watch out on Discord and continue to interact with all the morning speakers as well. All right, see you all in the afternoon.
Yes,